Hello again, my little conscript, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. So recently, a video from the fantastic YouTube channel TacticalTortoise popped up on my feed about the most infamous moment in competitive Warhammer 40k history. If you've not seen that video, I highly recommend that you check it out, and I'll make sure there's a link to it down in the description below. It's very good, and it's also very important that pretty much all 40k players watch it. But what if I was to tell you there's more? More to the story. There's a little bit of context that needs to be covered here, which really brings everything into focus, really explains why this was such an important moment and how it is still impacting us in Warhammer 40k today, both competitively and casually. And if we're not careful, some of those lessons learned are going to be forgotten. And so, without further ado, let's fix bayonets and charge right into this thing.
Attention, guardsmen! The Commissariat has detected you have not yet liked this video. Do so immediately, or else you will face the Emperor's wrath. And anyone who has not yet subscribed to the channel will be transferred to the penal battalions. That is all. Move out!
So first things first, I want to give you a quick summary of what happened. TacticalTortoise went into a lot more detail on this in his video, but this is just a quick heads up if you've not seen his episode. Basically what happened is there were two players in a game of competitive 40k at LVO. LVO was, and probably still is at the time of recording, the biggest Warhammer tournament in the world, and it was considered if you won LVO, you were basically the world championship. Now, essentially what happened is there was one player with Eldar and one player with Imperium. The player with Imperium, it came over to his turn, and he was like, oh, I'm just going to get my reserves out and place them where I can place them. That way I know what space I've got to move in with the rest of my army. And his opponent said, yeah, no problem. In fact, I'll help you place the models. So he places his reserves down, and then his opponent goes, well, you can't do any more movement. Bear in mind, his opponent had just helped him place these models, so he knew exactly what he was doing here. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, you do reserves at the end of your movement phase. You've just finished placing your reserves, so you can't do any more movement. Obviously, this is an incredible dick move because it's very, very clear what the intention of the Imperium players' actions were. Put my reserves down just so I can know where they're going to be. It's not going to impact the rest of my movement in any way, shape, or form. It's basically a form of pre-measuring, and pre-measuring is allowed in this game. But the judges were called over, and this is very important, interestingly, they sided with the Eldar playing, saying, well, rules as written, you've placed your reserves, so you can't do any more movement. Now, considering that the Imperium army was a melee army, not being able to move at all basically meant that he lost. Easily lost. There was nothing he could do about it. The game was over. This was turn one. And it was such an obviously shitty way for the Eldar player to win that people weren't very happy with it. But karma works quickly, and what happened is going into the next game, the final, the Eldar player played against Nick Navati of Art of War 40k. If you've not heard of that channel, I don't know where you've been. Another fantastic channel, doing all the shout outs today, but seriously, check them out. And Nick is very, very, very good at the rules. He's really very, very good at the rules. And what happened was the Eldar player used a unit to move forward and advance, but he didn't play a stratagem which allowed that unit to advance and charge at the right time. He was meant to use it in the movement phase when the unit advanced, not in the charge phase. Now, obviously, that's a little bit different how we would do things today. Typically, that stratagem would say use it in the charge phase, but back then, it very specifically said you use it when the unit does the advance. So the Eldar player has moved, he's advanced his unit, it's very clear what his intention is, but because he technically didn't play the stratagem at the right time, what happened is Nick said, when it came to the assault phase, Nick said, you can't do that. And he was like, what do you mean I can't do it? He went, it's in the movement phase. You didn't use strategy in the movement phase. And the Eldar player was like, oh yeah, but it was very obvious what my intention was. And Nick said, well, I'm not going to let you do it because of what you did in your last game. Basically being like, look, karma, what goes around comes around. If you're going to be a dick to someone, don't be surprised when someone else is a dick to you. I know we're all meant to live in a tolerant society and, turn the other cheek and all that kind of stuff, but sometimes revenge is a dish best served on a tabletop. And this was just a chef's kiss moment, and actually a really ballsy moment, because think about it, this instantly led to a lot of confrontation, not only at this point but also throughout the entire game. And I know many of us would probably shy away from that confrontation. I know many tabletop gamers would be like, oh, I'm just going to let it slide. Oh, I don't want to, don't want to cause a problem. But fair play with Nick. He's got some balls on him, and he was like, nope. You were, and the fact to call it out from the previous game as well, you were a dick to somebody else, so now I'm going to be a dick to you. You fucked him, so I'm fucking you, was just absolutely poetic. Now, I want to make something abundantly clear before anyone gets the wrong end of the stick. Nick very clearly said during the game, and his track record speaks for itself as well, would never normally play a game of 40k like that. He would, of course, always play for intention, but he was proving a point here. And so I don't want anyone thinking, oh, well, Nick's just as bad as the Eldar guy. No. Nick was proving a point, and it was a point that needed to be proven. So that, broadly speaking, covers what happened on the tabletop at that day. And it's a beautiful story, and it's one that, you can't help but smile when you hear it. But what happened on that day did change Warhammer 40k forever. And it was the end of, I would say, of a very dark era of 40k and the beginning of a much better era. You see, 8th edition was a time of great change, more so than we have ever seen in 40k history, apart from maybe the transition from 2nd to 3rd edition. 8th edition was the Great Reset. 8th edition was the new epoch, and with it came a lot of new players. But those new players had very different ideas to how things have been done in the past. In previous editions of Warhammer 40k, it had been unbelievably sweaty. The idea of win-at-all-costs players now pales absolutely and utterly in the face of how sweaty, win-at-all-costs, that guy, 40k competitive players used to be in 6th edition and 7th edition especially. And remember, I was there for those editions. To me, they are not that long ago. And I remember distinctly playing many games of 6th edition and 7th edition, coming away feeling very, very frustrated because of the chicanery and the shenanigans which were just accepted as part of standard play. And it was something that me and my brother, Mordy Bro, always used to complain about, always used to rail against when we were playing games against other people, especially at local tournaments. To give you an idea of how bad this mentality was, and how all-pervasive it was as well. My brother and I were playing at a local tournament, and I finished my game a bit early, pretty certain I'd just been absolutely stomped, and I went over and watched my brother's game, and he was going to win his game. It was very obvious that he had his opponent on the ropes, and that there was nothing his opponent was going to be able to do against his unrelenting Tau firepower. Yeah, I know, Mordy Bro's a Tau player. Look, let's just forgive him for the purpose of this story. But the point is, it was turn 3, this guy was very clearly going to get tabled basically in the next turn or two. It's a 6-turn game at the time. And so what he does is he goes, okay, before my brother starts his turn, he goes, okay, well, good game. And puts his hand out. And my brother, thinking, oh, well, he's conceding, goes, oh, thanks, mate, and goes, good game. And his opponent goes, okay, well, I win then. And Mordy Bro was like, what do you mean? You win, you've just conceded. You went, no, I didn't concede. I never said I was going to concede. I said, good game. And I put my hand out to shake your hand. And that is in the rules pack. That says that's the, opponent should be shaking hands at the end of the game. So we've just ended the game here. Technically, we've just ended the game here. So it ends at the stage. I'm on all of these objectives, so I'm going to win the game. My brother's like, no, that's obviously bullshit. You can't just do that. Gets the judge over. The TO comes over and says, well, it does say in the rule pack, if you shake hands, that's the end of the game. So that's the end of the game. How utterly mental is that? And this is what I mean when I say it was all pervasive. It wasn't just at big tournaments like LVO. This was a local RTT, a local game. And what's very important to notice, and I noticed this in the Tactical Tortoise video as well, is that in both cases, the judges actually sided with the rules as written interpretation, which is very, very different to how it would be done now. Now, I think judges do a very, very good job of balancing rules as written versus don't be a dickhead and sportsmanship. If that incident happened today, more than likely the judge would turn to the opponent of Mordy Bro and go, yellow card, DQ this game. Not even going to talk to you about it. That's obviously a dick move. Stop it. And that is just one example of dozens that I have. I could probably make a whole video just going over all the mental gotcha stuff like that myself and Mordy Bro encountered throughout all of 6th and all of 7th edition. But getting back to the story, getting back to the context, this was, like I said, pervasive at all levels of Warhammer 40k, even casual play. And there was no room, especially by the end of 7th edition, there was no room for fluffy lists. You just got utterly tabled. I remember another story. There was an army called Farsight Bomb. It would drop down and it would just, from Deep Strike, and it would just delete basically 1,000 to 1,500 points of any army whatsoever. The game is way more lethal than it was now, and it was way more competitive than it is now. And basically, obviously there were going to be a lot of people that didn't like this kind of mentality, but those people got essentially just pushed out. They basically like, this hobby's not for me anymore. This is a load of bollocks. People are just playing. I'm just getting dicked over. Because if you play a game and you're just getting dicked over and everyone you seem to play seems to be a dickhead, why would you stick around with that game? You're going to go and do something else. And a great example of that Farsight Bomb thing that I mentioned is this was something that one of the local guys at our club used. And there was another guy, an Imperial Guard player, who had probably the largest and most impressive collection of Praetorian Guard I've ever seen at that point. Every model was perfect. And he used to build his army based upon like the official force organization, not chart that you built your army on, but like how the platoons and stuff were laid out in codex and stuff. Very, very, very cool. He put an unbelievable amount of effort and time into his army, getting all the Praetorian models, all the original ones that he could, and lovingly painting them and restoring them. And he played against this Farsight Bomb and just lost. Basically turn 2, just that was it. His army was dead. And then he played into another list and just got smashed, and another list and just got smashed. And after a couple of tournaments of this, because everything had sort of gone this direction, it gone this direction very quickly, he was basically like, I'm out. I'm just going to stick to hobbying now. There's no point in me turning up to these games. The time that I could spend playing these games and coming to these tournaments is time that I could just spend on the bit that I'm actually enjoying, which is my loving Praetorian army. Now, the reason it's important to mention that a lot of those people got pushed out is because by the time you got to the end of Warhammer 7th edition, everyone was playing in just this cutthroat manner. 99.9% of people, especially at the tournament level. Every list was a broken net list mess. Every player was playing gotchas and everything. Everyone was just being utterly, utterly mental, win at all costs, that guy. And what's interesting is as this toxic attitude became more widespread, the 40k community actually shrunk. And 7th edition was actually a bit of a disaster for Games Workshop. It's the reason that we have modern 40k, New Hammer the way that it is. The rules completely changed. 8th edition was a great reset, and in many ways 8th edition was an apology from Games Workshop saying, look, we know we kind of screwed up, that game was very bad. Please come back to the game, because Games Workshop nearly went bankrupt with 7th edition. It was a mental time. And 8th edition was really good because it was much fairer, it was much nicer. All of the jank had been stripped out of it. It was much more honest Warhammer. And this attitude shift from Games Workshop and the promise of things would be different this time not only brought a lot of the older, more casual, more sportsman-like players back into the hobby, but it also brought a huge amount of new blood into the hobby. And this new blood, these greenhorns, were absolutely vital to what came next. Because all of the old grognards from 7th edition went into 8th edition with the same mentality. I'm going to gotcha you. I am going to... it's only cheating if you get caught, all that kind of stuff. They went into the new edition with that mentality. And because for the last 2 or 3 years, everyone else had the same mentality, so it was just the way everyone played. That was normal. That was the way things were. But the new players coming into the game were like, no, that's bullshit. And a really big factor, a really big part of the new players coming into the game were... a lot of them were normies, and a lot of them were a little older as well. Not only did you have the usual crop of, kids coming into the game and everything, but a lot of people who came into 8th edition were older players. People in their late 20s, their 30s, and their 40s. People who were getting back into this game because they had played it as a kid, but who were adults and who had an adult's perspective and who had an adult's experience. And these people just did not stand for the chicanery. Whereas a traditional 40k player who might have been a little more, reserved, a little bit more, I don't want to have any confrontation or anything like that, who would have let these things kind of slide in the past, and how, who these original Grognard players are kind of preyed upon in many ways. The new players coming in were like, you can't do that. That's bullshit. No, you're not going to let me do the rest of my movement after Deep Strike? Nah, man, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. No, I'm just going to do it. It was a really big attitude shift. And these two mindsets clashed a lot at the beginning of 8th edition. And there are many, many instances, many examples of old grognardy bullshit behavior getting called out and just getting pulled out into the light of day and not being able to stand it when they were called out on it. If you want an example of this from myself, some of you will have seen my videos, Bill the Bastard and Fighty Kyle, and many of my other crazy stories from Warhammer 40k are from 8th edition. This was because it was this meeting of minds or clashing of minds where you had a lot of grognards, you had a lot of chicanery coming from the old guard, but the new people were just not standing for it. And what was great is that not only were the new people not standing for it, but the people that had come back into the game were like, hey, we've actually got backup now, and they weren't going to stand for it. And what's even better on top of this is that a lot of people who were pillars of the community, who were people who had come over from 7th edition, who were in that sort of small percentage of people who had always tried to be sportsmanship, actually were able to be like, you know what? Finally, I don't have to play like a knobhead. Finally, I can play the proper way, and it's the right way of playing. And so basically, a huge amount of people, the majority of people that came into the game were like, look, the chicanery is over. And after about 12 to 18 months of 8th edition, when we'd had this culture clash, when we'd had these two different philosophies and ideologies meeting each other constantly, but neither one had won out, we had the incident talked about with TacticalTortoise. We had the most infamous moment in tabletop wargaming, Warhammer 40k. We had the Eldar player diddling the Imperium player and then getting caught out in karma, and that was the watershed moment. That was the moment when the new guard, the new way, won. because it was all caught on camera. This was a big thing. Up until this point, a lot of it had just been, oh, well, this happened at said tournament and so on and so forth. And so there'd been a bit of rage about it. But until there was video evidence, it was very hard because you can't really take one side or another without actually seeing what happened. You shouldn't really call anyone out if there's not the evidence behind it. But this was the hard proof. And this was the moment that so many people rallied around and were like, this chicanery, this shenanigans, this toxic mindset, this rules as written, well, actually, this shit has got to go. And it did. Overnight, play as intended, play for intention, became king. If you have heard of that saying, let's play for intention, no gotchas, you do a little bit of take backs, I'll do some take backs as long as it goes both ways, that's fine. If you've ever had that conversation with someone at the beginning of a 40k game, whether it's competitive, whether it's casual, you can owe that mindset. You can owe literally your ability to say that and for it to be reciprocal from the other side to this moment. Because up until the Eldar chicanery, up until what happened on that game in 8th edition, that didn't exist. That saying didn't exist. It was coined very quickly in the wake of this whole thing. And we still use it nearly 10 years later. Nearly 10 years later, people still start their games off with, let's play as intended. Let's establish that now. And the good that this has done, the transformation, the positive transformation that this has had on the 40k community and on 40k gameplay is amazing. It is beautiful, and it is one of the most cherished things that I still love about this game. And for all of the faults of New Hammer, and for all of the faults of new GW and all this kind of stuff, the fact that we still have players' intention as a cornerstone, as the foundation of how we approach every single game is so good. It's so important. People who pine for older editions, and I am guilty of feasting on those member berries and looking at old editions with nostalgia. But one thing I'm not guilty of, and anyone who's watched any of my live streams has heard me talk about this before, I'm not nostalgic for 6th edition, 7th edition, and the mentality that really came to a peak at that time, because it had always been a thing that had run through the 40k community. It had been, but it came to its peak and it dominated in 6th and 7th edition. And that demon getting exercised in 8th edition was so good. Going back to old editions is great when you look at the rules, but going back to the mindset, maybe it was just because we had a bunch of socially awkward nerds who were just like, wow, any way to get a win? I don't know. Maybe it was because, War Machine was kind of running concurrently at this time, and War Machine really encouraged that win at all costs kind of mentality. You've got to be the best. That was War Machine in a nutshell. It was a very, very competitive kind of game. But I don't know what it was, but the old mindset of Old Hammer was not good. And I think a lot of people going back to Old Hammer now are doing it the right way. They're going back with the benefit of hindsight. They're going back with the lessons and the attitude of New Hammer being applied to Old Hammer. And that's where I think Old Hammer can be like peak and perfect 40k, because you get all the benefits of the flavor of the old rules. The old ways were much more flavorful, but the old mentalities were much more toxic. Now, though, with New Hammer, I have to say, one of the biggest advantages it has and will always have over Old Hammer in terms of comparing the old ways and the old epoch and the new ways and the new epoch is the mentality and the attitude of the community. Sportsmanship is peak and is the most important thing in 40k these days. But, and there is a big but, we have seen things slip. It seems like a month, sometimes a week can't go by without there being some high profile drama, be it some kind of cheating or chicanery. There does seem to always be more and more incidences of this popping up. In fact, I would say in 10th edition, I have seen more issues of cheating and poor sportsmanship than I did throughout basically 8th edition and 9th edition. As the years have gone on, as we have got further and further away from this touchstone moment, the lessons have begun to fade into memory and fade into myth and fade into legend. And for some people, they don't really even know them. They don't even really appreciate it. And so I am a little worried that as a community, we are starting to slip back. And that's why I think this Tactical Tortoise video is so important. And that's why I hope this video in its own small way can contribute to us all remembering the lessons of the past. Because I've seen a few times when people have tried to like gotcha with a stratagem, like, you know, you line your whole army up knowing you're going to like shoot at an enemy unit, and your opponent goes, okay, reactive move. Because it's like a stratagem. It's like, oh. Or they're like, okay, armor contempt. It does happen. I'm not saying it happens a lot now. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's everywhere. But it does happen more than I would like it. And it does happen more than it used to. And I would say as 10th edition has gone on, and as the game has become ever increasingly more competitive, we have started to see some old demons rear their ugly heads once again. And so the point of this video that I'm making today is to really hammer home those lessons of the past. Don't be a dick. Don't gotcha. Always play as intended. Always allow takebacks. Even at the highest level. It doesn't matter whether it's bottom table or top table. It doesn't matter whether it's going to cost you the game or it's going to win you the game or whatever it may be. Playing as intended, playing with sportsmanship is the most important thing. And I know that there's always going to be some people that say, oh, well, some people are going to take the piss with playing intended. They're going to abuse that system. Those people always, of course, need to be called out as well. But I would much rather live in a world where there are a few people that abuse that system than everyone. And the go-to mindset was win at all costs. Because I was there, Gandalf, 3,000 years ago, when the courage of gamers failed. And it was fucking awful. It was miserable. And the worst thing that can happen to Warhammer 40k is we even slightly slide back. And I have seen a few telltale signs, more than a few, and we just need to remember. So whether you were there when it happened, or whether you're someone that's joined in 10th edition, and maybe someone who's going to see this video in the future and has joined in 11th edition, or maybe whatever it is, just remember, don't be a dick, play for intended. You want to win, but you have to win in the right way. Because if you start being a knobhead, and everyone starts being a knobhead, then no one's going to have a good time. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Were you there when this all went down? And have you noticed things changing a little bit in more recent years? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Redfield, 32, Jurgens, Miasma, Try Again, Bragg, RJ, Scorpion, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Nicholas Walsh, John Stubbs, Guardian, Varney, Sword, Fish Trombone, Picklock the Forged. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.